first thing you raised was what is the definition of the middle class in a country like India. The middle class in India must be defined not by income alone, but by aspiration. To my mind, the middle class essentially is insular. The middle class wants more income, less taxes, more consumer goods. The challenge is that incomes are relatively shrinking, especially after COVID.
Hello and welcome to TheFederal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we discuss something in a complete gamut of issues, not just a news-specific headline of the day. There is no clear definition of what comprises the Indian middle class. Various estimates vary. Their wages are what they earn. Different people have different categories, criteria to identify and classify them. But by and large, about 30% of the Indian population is considered to be the middle class, and they comprise, one of the statistics suggests, that about 38 to 40 crore of our total workforce. Now, what we are seeing, that we have seen this middle class expanding over the past few decades, especially after economic liberalization in the early 1990s, and after the onset of the 21st century, this kind of speeded up. But of late, we have been reading about a large number of issues or challenges which the middle class is facing. They say that there is a declining number of jobs. They say that inflation is beginning to hit the middle classes very, badly. Two commodities, two objects, which used to be the aspiration of the middle classes after getting a steady job, used to be a decent entry-level car and a small apartment if they were living in an urban center where most of the middle class lives. Cars are becoming expensive, houses is becoming sky high for no apparent reason because there aren't so many buyers. Anyway, that is not the issue what we're talking about. We are talking about the challenges which the middle class is facing, which people like you and me, in all probability, the viewer and us, are facing on a day-to-day basis. I will be talking to who else but Mr. Pavan Varma, who, of course, has been in the Indian Foreign Service, been the Indian ambassador to Bhutan. He's been a member of the Rajya Sabha, been active in politics, has a very powerful and strong voice. More importantly, he's written several books, almost about 15, 20. That is the latest count possibly I have. Most importantly, why he's joining is that in the late 1990s, he wrote a seminal book, The Great Indian Middle Class. So first of all, Pavanji, thank you for joining us in the middle of a break from the hot and now, wet Delhi. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to speak to you once again on this program.
Pleasure.
Let me begin straight away, by saying, that it is more than 25 years since you wrote your first book, actually, talking about the middle class, not just as a demographic entity, but also as some kind of a voice of the country, a very important voice. I would like to hear from you, what are the challenges and what are the changes that you see in the middle class in the last few years?
Oh, thank you so much, Nilanjan. It's a great pleasure to talk to you. You see, you rightly said that the middle class has grown exponentially since I last wrote my book, which was very widely read. Yes. After that, I wrote a slimmer volume called
That's right.
The New Indian Middle Class. I have been keeping an eye on the class to which both you and I belong. The first thing you raised was what is the definition of the middle class in a country like India. And I want to say, as far as I'm concerned, anyone above the poor and below the very rich belongs to the middle class. Why I say this is that The range of the middle class in India, in contrast to that of Western countries, is very, very wide.
Hmm.
Uh, Let us take, for instance, someone who, for the first time in his village, gets a government job, even at the level of a peon with a fixed salary and possibly some disposable income. To my mind, he has or she has already climbed the first rung of the middle class, if not in terms of the conventional perquisites of a middle class defined as in the West, but in terms of the contrast with which he or she now stands with the vast number of those below that defining line, the absolutely
Right.
poor and the poor. Secondly, the middle class in India must be defined not by income alone,
Right.
but by aspiration. So, somebody, for instance, the same example who has climbed on the first rung of what is the middle ladder, middle class, is already aspiring to send his children to a good school, is already aspiring to move from a cycle to a scooter, and in due course from a scooter to a car,
Par.
is already aspiring to move from a cooler to an air conditioner, is already dreaming about what his children will become if he could invest in their education in the right way,
Hmm.
is already looking for new opportunities to rise on that ladder. So
Okay.
aspirationally, they are part of the middle class milieu. Now, from that lowest rung to the highest rung, you have people who can be called affluent. They are also the middle class, both in terms of aspiration and what they have achieved. So, therefore, I do not subscribe to the theory that the Indian middle class is only 30% of our
Okay.
entire population. It's much larger. Now, to come to your second question about what are some of its disappointments and what are some of its challenges. To my mind, the middle class essentially is insular. And I'm sorry I'm putting it so bluntly, but
No,
I
no,
belong to
no.
the same class, a little self centered. It seeks its own good to the exclusion of almost any other holistic concept of the nation as a whole. And let me tell you, for the first time perhaps in our history, it's become a pan Indian class. It is not divided necessarily on a pan Indian scale only in terms of region or caste. You will see people from Uttar Pradesh getting an admission in Puducherry.
Hmm.
You will find the same middle class wearing the same clothes anywhere in India. You will find the same middle class sucked into the undefinable cosmopolitan unanimity of metropolises. You will find more now, more, but not entirely, intercaste marriages, inter-community marriages in bigger
Okay.
cities. You will find people in the south eating tandoori chicken and people in the north now welcoming a dish of idli and dosas.
That's
It
like
has
the national dishes.
in a suit, in a sense, the safari suit and the salwar kameez and every range in between has defined the middle class sartorially. In other words, it is a pan Indian class with a common aspiration, a certain element of common educational background, and many things in common. Now, what are the things in common? What does the middle class want? before we see what it's not getting. The middle class wants more income, less taxes, more consumer goods, better educational opportunities for its children, preferably in higher education. It is less concerned about primary education. It's less concerned about primary health care. And in a sense, it is the same critique which I had made in my book 25 years ago is valid even today. It is somehow trying to secede from the republic to form its own little nation, a kingdom within a kingdom. So, therefore, you have this proliferation of gated communities where
Right.
people buy, build high walls, arrange for their own water and electricity, and try to keep the unwashed masses out, except for
Right.
purposes of necessary labor.
That's
Gated
right.
communities are the new sign of the middle classes' desire to be, in a way, insulated from the larger concerns
That's right.
of the country, of which certainly poverty and deprivation are a part. The challenge is that incomes are relatively shrinking, especially after COVID.
That's
There
right.
is a few study which shows that as a consequence of COVID, incomes and jobs shrunk. So many people who were precariously on the lower rungs of the middle class
Has slipped
slipped
below.
back into poverty. Things have become better, but there are still issues relating to savings, relating to the hope for higher incomes, relating to the tax regime, where the middle class feels somehow that while it does all the work, it also pays all the taxes. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. So, in a way, the middle class dream is becoming more challenging. The middle class dream that seemed to be achievable in the decade after 1991, when the economic reforms were introduced and incomes went up substantially, credit was available easily, consumerism grew rapidly. Today, all of this has, in a way, plateaued. I'm not saying all of it is not there, but it has plateaued. And one of the things that worries it is inflation. So, as against incomes which have not grown, you have higher prices for a lot of essential commodities, which hits the average middle class, not the affluent, and certainly below the average, the struggling middle class seeking to rise up further.
Right.
So, these are the challenges that the middle class is facing today, and yet it is one of the most influential and powerful voices in the country because it controls the instrumentalities to be heard through the media and otherwise.
Pawanji, very well, introductory comments introducing, taking us through the entire, a journey of the middle classes. And when you were talking about the middle class in the gated colony, bring up, raise high walls. There's just an anecdote which I wanted to share with you. Very early in my career, in fact, almost at the right, at the beginning of it, I had started out in journalism with an interview with the veteran filmmaker Mrinal Sen, whose then latest film Ek Din Pratidin was on a middle class family and the challenges it faced because of her. This was a lower middle class family, quite clearly. There was a single young girl who was the breadwinner of the family and the crisis around it. So in the course of the interview, Mr. Sen said, Mrinal Sen said something, which he attributed peculiarly to Gandhi. I have never been able to find that quotation from Gandhi, after the advent of Google and, search engines. He said that middle class, we were talking about the middle class crisis. So he said the middle class is somebody who hates the poor and wants to be rich. That description, we might disagree with it in its nuances, but somehow or the other it has stayed with me. I was also reading one of your articles, a couple of years ago, where you talked about, the collective behavior, one moving into the gated colony. So obviously there is a collective behavior we are talking about. He also wrote that is why sometimes the middle classes get taken in by demagogues who promise to cater to its wants, and say that, in today's context, we can say that just the way that the middle classes were supportive of emergency in the 70s, we can say that in 2014, when Mr. Modi came on a promise of better India, with a promise of several other things, improving the standards of life, there was an overwhelming support from the middle classes. There is an element of disarray now, but the support does not have really shifted very much away from that. They still are having problems, but yes, they continue to back him. So let us try to understand from you the political behavior of the middle classes, because political parties, and as a person who has been in political parties, how does political parties look at the middle classes and how much of it has been enlisted? What are the strategies they have deployed and the responses of the middle classes? Fairly elaborate, but I want you to walk us through this politics and the middle class issue.
No, thank you, Nilanjan. It's a good question. And I'm still a member of a new party called Jan Swaraj,
That's right.
which is led by Prashant Kishore, and we are fighting although a national party, our first election in Bihar. You see, the middle class's fealty or loyalty to democracy per se is extremely transactional. I say this again as a critique of myself, yourself, and anyone else. Some of us are perhaps more liberal in a principled manner, but the majority of the middle class has a sentiment, whether they will acknowledge it publicly or not. ये थोड़ा बहुत डंडे की जरूरत है. We need a strong leader. Now, this sentiment enables it to be easily seduced by anyone who promises to do for the middle class what it wants to be done for itself. And putting Gandhiji's old saying on its head is more concerned with the ends rather than the means. So, you will see, for instance, that I mentioned this in the context of the rise of Mr. Narendra Modi, and I'm not making a critique one way or the other.
No, definitely not.
As a matter of strategy, I know that he said, let me first influence the middle class, which in the post UPA 2 years, and especially the second term of the UPA 2, UPA, there was a genuine sense of the political leadership floundering. And the sentiment of a strong leader emerging, the support for that in the middle class was very, very clear. And I must say that it's not only true about India. It is the same reason why leaders in many countries today, including in the West, have seen the rise of the ultra right, where leaders say, dispense with the old, uh, you know, liberal constraints on democratic functioning. And let's have a leader who gets on with the facts, calls a spade from their point of view, and uh, rides roughshod over such trivial things as human rights, the right to protest, dissent, and the role of minorities within nations.
Minorities get targeted.
Well,
Every-
this is part of an overall
Part of
package,
that.
as it
Yes,
were,
yes, yes.
and they are getting very much more support in the middle class. As you can see from the right of many uh, ultra right leaders in the West, it happened much before that in Germany. I'm not saying that is happening in India necessarily, but certainly it's a sentiment which is common to the middle class. And I'll give you a simple reason why. You see, you yourself mentioned that the middle class wants jobs.
Right.
It wants less competition for those jobs.
Yes.
Now, if there are people that can be conveniently or expediently labeled as being not qualified to compete for the jobs, perhaps more talented, perhaps not. If that number of those competing for a job can be reduced on the grounds that they are not up,
Mm.
which is the argument always of the ultra,
That's right.
then it becomes that much easier for the middle class, because in the last days of the Mughal Empire, there used to be a saying, Yak anar, sad bimar.
Mhm.
One pomegranate, 100 ill people. So the opportunities are less, the claimants are more. And in a country like India, that is all the more the case. And in other countries like in the West, where there may be economic recession or economic decline, it is a similar situation. Therefore, the middle class happily co-opts into, sometimes colludes, I must say, on record with very important, honorable exceptions who protest.
That's right.
But by and large, the middle class, if it can reduce the number of those on whom the limited resources of a state can be legitimately spent and instead be parceled as part of a smaller cake in which they have a bigger share,
Right.
the middle class is happy. And
Right.
that is what explains why middle classes often opt for the illusion of a strong leader until it hits them.
Hmm.
Let me give you an example.
Right.
Bulldozer Justice.
Yes.
These days, it's a
It's
new
very
expression
fashionable and being used.
in India. It's entirely illegal. The Supreme Court has passed very strong strictures on it. It is absolutely unauthorized misuse of executive authority in deliberate violation of specifically laid down procedures. So long as it is happening to the other, quote unquote,
It's fine. It's fine.
middle class is fine. But
Absolutely.
if in that process the bulldozer's driver loses some control on the wheel and it affects the middle class, which has been a happy bystander,
Mhm.
then the middle class suddenly becomes aware of the need for democracy, of its democratic rights, and the need for limits on power. This is precisely what happened in the emergency, let me tell you.
Exactly.
When the powers of the state did not only remain confined to ensuring that trains run on time, people come to office on time, there is discipline, there is no labor protest, somehow the system is kept more manageable
Right.
and their interests are protected within it. And the cacophony of a democracy is stilled.
It's not there. Yeah.
And more work can be done through whatever means possible in their benefit. The middle class was a collusionary. But when that very state began to trample on rights of the middle class,
Mhm.
it became a part of the protest. So this is sometimes the psychological syndrome in which the middle class.
Right. Let me interject. We are talking about, when we talk about the middle class, we think that they have a common identity. We talked about the gated colony and using it as a symbol that this gives a common identity. You talked about preference for authoritarianism, Danda Raj. Very well said. All those are true. Bulldozer justice, yes. But my question is, India is also a country where politics is identity driven. So within the middle class, people of multiple identities live. There is this entire, elephant in the room, reservations. We are on the threshold of a caste-based enumeration. We do not know what will be the steps thereafter. How do you look at identity and middle classes? How will it likely play out? Just trying to understand.
If you look quickly, and I'll give you a short answer, in the Constituent Assembly, when the issue of reservation for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes was mooted by Dr. Ambedkar, there was considerable debate, many reservations,
Right.
and protest. Finally, it was included because Dr. Ambedkar says that if you don't take due affirmative action for the vulnerable and who have been vulnerable for centuries, democracy itself will explode. After that came Mandal.
Hmm.
Mandal was seen as a direct encroachment on traditional identity established classes, the
That's right.
upper classes, and the middle class within them for jobs, for educational opportunities, etc. Subsequently, what has happened is that those to whom this affirmative action was extended have also become part of a middle class within their own grouping.
Right.
Today, the middle class are not only Brahmins, they are not only Rajputs, they are not only Bhumiyas, they are not only Kayas, they are Yadavs and the whole range of the OBC community and
Right.
some even from those below. So now they are, that's why I said it's a pan Indian class. At one level, transcending regional and identity politics because the interests have become common. Earlier, they could be easily divided or compartmentalized.
Hmm.
And even today, that sentiment is played upon by politicians for winning local elections, etc.
That's right.
But by and large, the middle class has today become a pan Indian entity, by and large, where it has a common collective goal. And in that gated community, you will find, strangely enough, with a few exceptions, people both from the earlier established caste hierarchy
Caste communities
and
and also the new
new,
ones.
the new entrants, and they are all collectively part of a certain ideological perspective on the world outside. The third
Right.
part of this answer is that even if the middle class does this, it cannot become as insular as it would like it to become, because next to every affluent colony is a slum.
That's
And
right.
the two cannot be segregated, because those in the affluent colonies need drivers, they need cleaners, they need
They need
watchmen,
housemates, housemates.
they need housemaids, they take part time help. Now, these come from the slum, and there is a mutual, if you like, correspondence between affluence and poverty coexisting, in spite of the affluent not wanting it, because the affluent cannot now survive without that slum colony against it. Sometimes it is so conspicuous. I stay, let us say, in an affluent suburb of Delhi. There are three slums around. Next, very close to my house, is a five-star hotel,
That's right.
where next to it is a slum. Now, politics, of course, are in play, where politicians cannot remove them because more of them go to vote. But
Yes.
also, there is a syndrome of mutual interdependence,
They
where
need us, we
this
need
kind
them.
of insularity is impossible. So,
Yes.
therefore, the essential point I want to drive is identity, yes, but can't be maintained with that purity as you want. Exclusion, yes, but cannot be sustained. Uh, Benefits, yes, but can be ephemeral. Demagogues promise but often don't deliver.
Don't deliver. Yes.
So the middle class today, in my view, is so caught up in the rat race of success
Hmm.
because of the infinity of competition. Please see the entrance tests to colleges
Yes.
and the capitation fees that private colleges demand. And you will see that the competition is so intense, in a sense, for the survival of middle class status, that all other concerns now become peripheral.
Hmm.
And the middle class, therefore, becomes, and to come back to that point, more and more an island unto itself.
Okay. Become more and more an island to itself, and that is where we will possibly leave this discussion. That middle class is only going to, maybe just time for a last question, quick answer from you.
Yes.
It's only, the size is only going to increase, competition will increase. So do you envisage social unrest, and this time from the middle classes also?
Uh, yes, it can happen. It is already happening in some parts of the
Yes.
country, because the middle class's threshold of denial is low.
Hmm. Yes.
If it does not, within a definable time frame, achieve some of its goals, it ceases to be with the middle. And if there is a black swan event like COVID,
Right.
its existence becomes, in a way, jeopardized. So middle class does not have the patience.
It
And
wants quick
therefore
solutions.
it wants a quick solution, and therefore it can join in the unrest. The unrest against a very complicated GST,
Yes.
the unrest against rising taxes on certain commodities which affect its lives,
Right.
the unrest against shrinking incomes, the unrest against lack of jobs. These are things on which the middle class can mobilize itself, and there have been occasions, and this is important, where it mobilizes itself. I mean, it will mobilize itself on a Jessica Lal. Very
Yes.
rightly so. Very rightly so. I lauded that.
The
But
Delhi way.
every 7 minutes, or whatever the statistics the NCRB has released, a woman in similar or worse circumstances is raped among the poor in this country or shot dead.
Yes.
That may not touch the conscience of the middle class, but still I greatly approve of its sense of solidarity, as it showed in Jessica Lal. I'm just giving one example.
So the RG Kaur instance in West Bengal, in Kolkata.
Archana, yes.
Yes.
So it's not as if, and especially if it happens to one of its own, that becomes news. Because the anchor on television is middle class. The writer in the media is middle class. The protester is middle class. The victim is middle class.
Well said. Thank you so much. We will leave it here and leave many things to deliberate and think about for the audiences. I hope that they go back and read up your books, because I think they are extremely important, and we would like you to keep writing on the middle class, be it through your columns or maybe even a slim book now, The New Middle Class in New India.
Well,
Thank you so much. Once again.
I'll have to make it the new middle, because I've written
New
another
middle
one.
class. Yes.
But thank you
Yes.
very much, Nilanjan. It was a pleasure.